Time is America's iconic news magazine with a weekly circulation of over 3 million copies sold all over the world. Founded by the publisher and aspiring Republican politician Henry Luce, it was at the heart of a stable of publications from Life to Fortune magazine, promoting what the founder called the American Century, Luce's fond tribute to America's rising global power. Luce had begun his plans to launch a new publication as early as 1921, shortly after graduating from Yale University. The initial plan, as Vanity Fair points out, was to produce a magazine for the illiterate upper classes, one which would give the rich just enough information to be able to start a dinner party conversation each week. Intriguingly, the article also demonstrates that as Luce sought to raise money for the venture, he was guided by his anti-Semitic bigotry about rich Jews, something the article alludes to as vague class-bound prejudices. Having raised the money, Luce had set up Time Inc. by 1923, launched the business magazine Fortune by 1930, and by 1936 had acquired the magazine Life. Luce, cheerfully mocked by Fortune magazine staffer Dwight MacDonald as Il Luce, a play on Mussolini's nickname Il Juice, generally imposed his own conservative, pro-business politics on his publications. He was a furious opponent of FDR's New Deal, and in the Cold War period, Time even invoked Orwell's 1984 as proof of the totalitarianism of New Deal policies. In order to resist the New Deal, the magazine latched onto the personality of energy capitalist Wendell Willkie, a right-wing Democratic politician who opposed the New Deal. The Luce stable practically manufactured his 1940 presidential bid out of nothing. One of Time's earliest marketing innovations, which is designed to make the magazine a news story at least once a year, is its annual Person of the Year award. In 1938, for example, its Man of the Year, as the award was then known, was one Adolf Hitler. This was not the first time the magazine was ready to gush praise over the Nazi dictator. As the late Alexander Cockburn wrote in Counterpunch, a similar cover had been prepared in 1934, a year after Hitler took power, and was only dropped at the last minute. Time's buried Hitler cover. Cockburn wrote, "Throughout the article, Times reporters and rewrite team gave Hitler every benefit of the doubt. Hitler's notoriously vitriolic hate speech was alternately dismissed as a put-on or excused as from the heart. The worst Time could say about Hitler is that he could occasionally be coarse, citing Hitler's oft-repeated claim that Jews are genetic garbage." A year after Hitler was chosen as Man of the Year by Time, the Russian dictator Stalin was nominated on the basis of his having signed the Non-Aggression Pact with Hitler that allowed the Nazi regime to begin its assault on Poland. But the sympathy for Hitler was secondary to the major passion of Henry Luce and his stable, which was the growth of American power. In a major 1941 editorial written for Life magazine, Luce called for the US to abandon what he called isolationism and use the moment posed by the Second World War to expand American powers overseas, a power dedicated to the triumphal purpose of freedom, and thus prove that the 20th century was the American century. In the Cold War period, therefore, Time was a staunchly anti-communist publication, one which also tended to revile the unions. As part of Luce's ideological part in the Cold War, Time was a major ally of the US government in its drive to conquer Southeast Asia. Throughout the Korean War, it castigated communism, and its covers lionized military leaders such as Marine Commandant Shepard. Its Man of the Year in 1951 was that stoical icon of American manhood, G.I. Joe. Even today, Time's account of how the Korean War started is a point-by-point regurgitation of a long-discredited version supported by the US government, which blames everything on the forces of the North crossing the 38th parallel, without acknowledging the role played by the US backing for an unpopular, anti-communist dictator in the South. There was little difference in its coverage of the Vietnam conflict. The stakes, for Time, were very clear. If Indochina falls, all of Southeast Asia is likely to go. Now, this, of course, was a reiteration of the US government's domino theory used to justify military aggression in the region. As the US involvement escalated in the early 60s, Time lauded the US mission to liberate the people of Vietnam from oppression, by which it meant the pressing threat of communist oppression. As the US government fabricated an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin, wherein the Viet Minh allegedly attacked a US naval vessel, Time was instrumental to amplifying the lie and scaremongering about the belligerent Red regime. And as anti-war opinion escalated, Time polemicized in favor of the right war at the right time and denounced the VIETNIKS for their self-defeating dissent. It also availed itself as an arm of US propaganda over the use of napalm, seeking to debunk public outrage in its piece, The Napalm Story. In the post-Vietnam era, Time was consistently one of the major cheerleaders for the reassertion of American power. Although Time may have moved on from the right-wing Cold War mongering of the loose era, it has continued to back the American empire regardless. On this note, a word about Time's Person of the Year charade. In 2006, Time magazine decided to conduct a readers' poll to decide the Person of the Year. They were decidedly discombobulated by the results, in which Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez won by a wide margin. Managing editor Richard Stengel intervened and decided that the winner should be you, yes you, saying that 2006 is a story about community and collaboration on a scale never seen before. It's about the cosmic compendium of knowledge, Wikipedia, and the million-channel People's Network, YouTube, and the online metropolis, MySpace. This was the result that was announced, with no mention of the actual poll winner. New York Daily News reports in their piece about Time's most controversial people of the year that the move was considered a gimmicky cop-out. Not entirely coincidentally, Stengel joined the US State Department later that year. Today, Time is a magazine of the neoliberal centre. Its coverage bland and filled with middle-of-the-road bien-pensants, but in some respects it remains true to its foundations. Always anti-union, it ran a notorious piece last year, The War on Teacher Tenure, scapegoating teaching unions for the problems in America's underfunded education system, for making it difficult to fire the rotten apples. Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting pointed out that the big problem with Time's teacher-bashing cover story was that it was entirely dependent on sources that favoured the government approach of privatising education and using charter schools. It also favours a line in racist provocation, for example by publishing a college freshman explaining why he would never apologise for his white male privilege amid a protest movement against systemic racism. Such tactics are, to be fair, a mainstay of boring centrist publications looking for some controversy, but it is also consistent with Time's ideological roots. In the Cold War era, it favoured a colourblind liberalism and tended to champion the moderate wing of the civil rights movement represented by the likes of Thurgood Marshall. But it was particularly concerned by the rise of black radicalism. As the civil rights movement took off and radicalised, it cautioned against the danger of militancy. In the era of black power, it promoted the toxic idea of a conflict between Jews and African Americans. And so it goes on. Consider the front cover of Time in 1994, when it decided to cover the ongoing O.J. Simpson saga by publishing a doctored, darkened image of Simpson. The purpose of the cover was to represent Simpson as guilty without explicitly saying that he was, as if he simply wasn't black enough to be scary enough for American readers. Responding to criticism of the cover, the New York Times reported that the managing editor, James R. Gaines, offered a grudging non-apology. It seems to me you could argue that it's racist to say that blacker is more sinister. But be that as it may, to the extent that this caused offence to anyone, I obviously regret it. That is, Time's argument was that the people who noticed and called out racism were the true racists. This is linked to Time's tradition of welfare bashing. The magazine had castigated the New Deal, and even in the liberal 60s, in their piece New York, the Welfare City, blamed welfare for creating ranks of job-shirking relief chiselers. In 1977, it had promoted the growing reaction against welfare by blaming America's inner-city problems on an underclass created by welfare policies. In its piece Welfare Reform, We Go After the Real Source of This Problem, it had welcomed Clinton's war on welfare mothers for forcing women into work, worrying only that it didn't go far enough. So it was that in the face of an epidemic of police violence against black people and a rising movement against it, Time's star columnist took the trouble to assure Americans that everything was going to be okay. Joe Klein wrote of how Trayvon Martin's death is an outrage, but, thanks to immigration, stronger laws, and years of hard work, our poisonous biracial era is ending. First, he offers his readers a quick review of America's racial history, asserting that in the past, the country had been blighted by a morally corrupt welfare system and that liberals had portrayed black criminals as social victims. Only by letting go of this past and allowing the colourblind children of the present to grow up without such coddling was America finally going to transcend its racial past and allow a non-racist future to emerge. There are signs that the popular appetite for Time's bland, middle ground, middle-brow fare may be in terminal decline. It has been losing revenue for some years, although as the Wall Street Journal reports, this has been tempered by cost-cutting, meaning, as The Guardian reported a couple of years ago, it has been shedding hundreds of jobs over the years. It is even questionable what purpose Time serves today. It is a long time since the illiterate bourgeoisie needed a colour magazine to tell them what to think, and the magazine's crusading for American power has lost its zeal. We may be witnessing a prolonged diminuendo of what used to be one of the most powerful publications in the United States.